He limped into the rebel camp, burned and bloodied, clutching the key that could cripple the Federation. Lyora stared, stunned. Then a blade flashed toward his throat. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The twin moons of Haven Reach hung low that evening, their pale light casting a soft glow over the dusty red plains that surrounded the settlement dome. Within the glowing glass arches of the colony, diplomats argued in steel-lined corridors, and holographic emissaries flickered in and out of council chambers. But in the neglected garden behind the communal quarters, 2 children sat cross-legged in the dirt, speaking no words at all. Ryan Parker had never believed in rules more than curiosity. He wasn't supposed to wander beyond the school sector, and definitely not outside the security threshold without a monitor chip. But when he'd first spotted Lyora alone near the service wall weeks ago, hands clasped behind her back, head down like someone trying to shrink her own shadow, he didn't see an alien. He saw someone lonelier than he was. That first day, she wouldn't speak. Just blinked at him with those luminous, unblinking eyes and refused the fruit bar he offered. But Ryan was stubborn in that way children often are, full of relentless goodwill untested by disappointment. So he came back. The second day, he brought her chalk. By the 5th, she was sketching constellations in the dust with him, explaining in halting English the names her people had given the stars. "That one," she whispered once, pointing to a fractured shard of sky barely visible beyond the dome. "We call Osai. It means the place you wait." She had a voice like wind in hollow glass. Their friendship was wordless more often than not, but rich in the silent language of shared wonder. They built cities out of pebbles, invented secret languages with blinking patterns. Ryan taught her to whistle. Lyora showed him how to touch a violin blossom so it shimmered green instead of blue. She never smiled with the others, but when Ryan tripped and fell into the irrigation trench with a startled yelp, she laughed. Really laughed, and he decided then that he liked that sound better than any song his mother had ever played. He didn't understand the strange meetings his parents attended, or why the violin guards always looked tense. He only knew that for a few hours each day, behind the old meteor rock, the world was just 2 kids and the stars above. But everything changed when his father came home early, uniform pressed, eyes hard. "Pack up, Ryan," he said. "We're shipping out." No time for goodbyes. No chance to explain. Ryan had to run to find her. He found Lyora in their usual spot, tears streaking silently down her silver cheeks. Her arms trembled, fists clenched around the last drawing they'd made. "I didn't forget," he said, panic rising in his throat. "I didn't forget you." And with all the certainty only a child could muster, he took her hand in both of his and whispered, "Wait for me. I'll come back. I promise. And when I do, I'll marry you." She said nothing, just stared at him like the universe had cracked, and then he was gone. He was. The sky above Haven Reach was no longer blue. The dome's shielding had dulled over the years, stained amber by pollution and years of low-grade conflict. What was once a cradle of diplomacy now felt like a broken promise, held together by concrete, tension, and the uneasy silence between armed patrols. Ryan Parker stepped off the transport skiff and into the dust-choked air with his helmet tucked under one arm, his Federation badge glinting faintly under the scorched light. 12 years had thickened his frame and narrowed his gaze, but something in his chest ached like the boy who once whispered a vow beside a meteor rock. Every step through the fractured colony clawed at the edges of that memory, murals scrubbed off walls, children with hollow stares, and Federation checkpoints cutting through what used to be a shared playground. He hadn't asked to be assigned here, but he hadn't declined either. The moment he saw her, he felt the breath catch in his throat. Leora. She was taller now, of course, her features sharper, her silver-blue skin etched with ceremonial violin tattoos that coiled across her collarbone and down one arm. Her hair, once unbound, was braided with obsidian strands, each thread a symbol of mourning or triumph. He couldn't tell which. But her eyes, those opal eyes, were harder than he remembered, dimmer, as if light had tried to live there once and been evicted. She stood on the edge of a crowd gathered in the shadows of the old colonial library, speaking softly to a cluster of violin elders. He stepped forward instinctively, his hand twitching as if to reach for her, then stopped when two guards raised their rifles. Only when she raised a hand did they lower them. Her eyes flicked to him, cold and measured. "You came back in armor," she said. Not a question. A sentence sharpened to a blade. "I came back," he replied, unsure if it was an answer or a plea. She dismissed the elders with a nod and walked closer, boots crunching on broken glass. "Your father's signature is on the expulsion order. My father dragged out of his post in chains. My mother shot in the chest during a peaceful march. You promised to marry me, Ryan. Instead, you married their silence." Her words struck like fists. He tried to speak, but nothing surfaced. Just shame and 1,000 questions far too late to matter. "I didn't know," he managed finally. "I swear to you, Leora, I didn't know." "Does it change anything?" she asked, head tilting slightly, voice low. "Does ignorance erase blood?" He had no answer. Only guilt blooming in the hollow of his chest. But she didn't walk away. She turned her back, slowly, deliberately, but left the door of the conversation cracked open with a single gesture. She didn't call for his arrest. And that, in Haven Reach, meant more than words. The violin resistance camp lay buried in the skeletal remains of what had once been a mining station, long abandoned, now draped in sheets of thermal camouflage and silence. Wind hissed through shattered support beams, whispering to the ghosts of collapsed steel. Ryan's blood hadn't yet dried when he stumbled across the threshold, trailing smoke and the scorched scent of plasma. Leora was the first to see him. She stood beside the old reactor shaft, briefing her cell leaders with a schematic spread across a rusted-out hull plate. When Ryan emerged from the haze, limping, half his jacket seared away, his right arm hanging uselessly, everything else stopped. Conversation died. All eyes turned. He tossed the black cube onto the steel slab, the encryption key unit. It clattered once and rolled to a stop beside the schematic. Gasps followed. Two violin prisoners emerged behind him, one leaning heavily on the other, both gaunt and bruised but alive. Ryan said nothing, just stood there, trembling, his breath ragged from smoke and pain, eyes locked on Leora like nothing else mattered. She didn't speak either, not right away. She moved toward him slowly, as if approaching something fragile, alien. Her fingers hovered just above the charred tear in his shirt, where cauterized flesh bloomed in angry reds and blacks along his collarbone. "You weren't supposed to come back alive," she said quietly. "Guess I failed that part," Ryan rasped, half smiling through blood-caked lips. She touched him, finally, just her fingertips against the burn, and her hand trembled, not from fear. "You could have run," she whispered. "No one would have blamed you." "I don't run from what I promised," he said. "Not anymore." Before she could answer, a shout echoed from the shadows. "Vec." He stepped from the corridor, his scars drawn taut over his jaw like war paint, plasma dagger gleaming in one hand. "He's a Federation dog," Vec growled. "This was supposed to kill him, not glorify him." Ryan shifted his stance, even through the pain. But Leora was faster. She spun, her own blade drawn in a blur of silver and blue, pressed cold to Vec's throat. "Do not mistake your hatred for judgment," she said, her voice colder than steel. "He walked through fire and brought us a future. You brought betrayal." The camp fell into stunned silence. Even Vec froze beneath her blade. Leora didn't lower the knife. "He's not the boy I remember," she said. "He's more." And behind her, Ryan didn't move. But in that moment, in the soot and sweat, something shifted. Not just in the room, in the tide. The wind was different now. Once dry and laced with soot, it now carried the scent of blooming ash root and clean earth, the colony's first signs of renewal rising from soil scarred by decades of distrust. The shattered dome that once confined Haven Reach had been dismantled section by section, replaced by open sky, shared air, and a tentative but growing peace. And at the edge of the valley, where the land still bore the imprint of that old meteor rock, a crowd gathered, violin and human alike, some in robes, others in worn uniforms, others in plain clothes marked only by the exhaustion of survival. They stood silent, shoulder to shoulder, their differences no longer hidden, but witnessed. Ryan stepped forward. No Federation armor, no emblems, no flag to serve. Instead, he wore a Violin combat suit forged from folded carbon fibers and ceremonial alloy, etched with runes of protection and renewal. The black and silver plating shimmered under the twin suns, reflecting not dominance, but reverence. A rebirth not of identity, but of intention. He walked past soldiers, children, farmers, and former rebels alike. Past the site where he'd once thrown a pebble into the sky, pretending it could touch stars. Past the place where he and Leora had drawn constellations in the dirt. Now the crowd parted in silence as he reached the meteor rock, half buried but unchanged, ancient, unyielding, sacred. Leora stood there already, waiting. She wore Violin ceremonial robes, long and iridescent, threaded with light reactive filaments that caught the wind like a nebula draped over her shoulders. Her tattoos gleamed with fresh ink. Her eyes, opal as ever, held no bitterness, no suspicion, only the weight of memory and the presence of now. Ryan knelt, not to submit, but to honor. His voice was steady, not loud, not rehearsed. "I'm not just keeping a promise," he said. "I'm choosing you, again." The silence afterward was complete. And then Leora moved, slowly, silently, until she knelt too. Her forehead touched his. "You took too long," she whispered, her voice thick with all the years between. "But I waited." A single tear fell, then another. She pulled him into her arms, not with ceremony, but with finality. And the crowd exhaled, not with applause, but with something deeper. Their union was not adorned with fanfare. But when the Violin elder announced it, when the first legal bond between a human and Violin was sealed, it was as if two fractured timelines had finally aligned. A child's vow, a woman's endurance, a soldier's return not to battle, but to love. In that moment, the meteor rock bore witness not to war or rebellion, but to fulfillment, and to the quiet beginning of something whole.